Imagine settling in for an evening of entertainment news, expecting a light-hearted story or two, and then finding yourself drawn into a saga so strange, so intense, that it feels like a Hollywood screenplay that never made it to theaters. Today our spotlight is on Howard Hughes, a man whose life seemed at first like the ultimate success story. Think multiple industries conquered, daring aviation records broken, and Hollywood at his fingertips. He had it all: brilliance, boundless wealth, good looks, and a restless energy to match. Yet behind those accolades lay an increasingly bizarre existence, complete with paranoid investigations, marathon movie binges, disheveled isolation, jars of urine, and disturbing whispers about how it all ended. The legend of Howard Hughes might remind you of a mythical figure who soars too close to the sun and plummets back to earth in a most spectacular way. But this is no Greek fable. It's the real account of one of the strangest men to ever emerge from the golden corridors of American wealth and fame. Let's explore his restless childhood, his relentless ambition, the powerful forces that shaped him, and the shocking, twisted final act that left even his devoted aides stunned. From the start, Hughes's family background carried a certain mystique. On his mother's side, family lore claimed distant ties to men who helped shape America itself, including one ancestor rumored to have baptized none other than George Washington. Whether that piece of family folklore was fully accurate or a bit embroidered, it gave Hughes an early sense that his lineage was intertwined with the country's founding. Another branch of his relatives included folks from the film world, a clear foreshadowing of where Howard would eventually leave his mark. But first, there's the question of his own birth date. Even something so basic turned into a murky puzzle. On one document, his birth certificate, it was listed as December 24th, 1905, in Harris County, Texas. Yet his baptism certificate claimed a different date entirely, September 24th, 1905, with no mention of location. So the official story is riddled with confusion before we've even made it out of the cradle. Did this confusion stem from some hidden motive on the family's part, or simply poor record keeping? Though official forms might have been at odds, one thing is certain: young Howard was precocious, almost unnaturally so. Growing up in Houston, he displayed a knack for engineering and electronics that baffled adults around him. At 11, he built the city's first wireless radio transmitter. Imagine an adolescent in the early 1900s, sifting through vacuum tubes and wires, assembling something that would have seemed downright magical to most people of that era. At 12, he became Houston's first licensed ham radio operator. The next year, he cobbled together a motorized bicycle from various parts, making headlines as the first boy in Houston to own such a contraption. Then at 14, he took his first flying lesson, yet another step that positioned him for feats destined to shape aviation history. You might say he was a classic American boy genius, mechanical, inventive, curious, and unwilling to stay within the small boundaries of his immediate world. But life had grim surprises in store. When Hughes was just 16, his mother died from complications related to pregnancy, a devastating moment, as he'd been especially close to her. Then, less than 2 years later, his father passed away from a sudden heart attack, leaving Howard an orphan at 17. The father, Howard Sr., had amassed a significant fortune thanks to his invention of a special drill bit crucial for oil exploration. It was a gold mine in an era when the oil business was booming. However, the older Hughes hadn't updated his will. Thus, young Howard became the sole heir, inheriting a vast empire at an age when many kids are simply trying to finish high school. Some in the family believed that Howard Sr. would never have intended for his only child to control that kind of money unsupervised. But the law is the law. With no updated will, the estate funneled straight to Howard Jr. For a teenager whose entire family had vanished almost overnight, the situation was surreal. He was wealthy beyond imagination, yet completely alone, forced to navigate adulthood with staggering resources at his disposal and precious little guidance on how to handle them. At 19, he gained legal control of his inheritance by becoming an emancipated minor. Perhaps drunk with freedom, he wasted no time in dropping out of college, marrying his sweetheart, Ella Rice, and heading to Los Angeles. Now, with a beautiful wife and bottomless bank accounts, he had the means to chase any dream that popped into his head. Soon enough, Hollywood piqued his interest. He found himself chatting with actor Ralph Graves, who pitched a film script he'd written, with himself in mind for the lead role. All that was missing was the funding. Hughes, never one to dabble cautiously, coughed up $40,000, a staggering sum in the late 1920s, to finance the project. The film, called Swell Hogan, spiraled out of control, with its budget ballooning to $80,000. Worse yet, the final product was reportedly so awful that Hughes's own uncle, a seasoned figure in the industry, begged him to burn all existing copies to prevent total humiliation. One can only guess how dreadful it must have been. But let's just say that no one will ever get to see it. Hughes did indeed order it destroyed. It was his first big cinematic lesson. Money might get you in the door, but it doesn't guarantee a decent movie. That fiasco had ripple effects on Hughes's personal life. His wife, Ella, unhappy with both his obsession with filmmaking and the general turbulence of their marriage, divorced him and returned to Houston. Undeterred, Hughes plunged deeper into Hollywood's bright lights and took up with a string of famous beauties. Over the years, gossip columns linked him to women like Bette Davis, Olivia de Havilland, Ginger Rogers, and Katharine Hepburn. Rumors even bubbled up that he had liaisons with male stars like Cary Grant and Tyrone Power, although these claims remain unconfirmed. Yet behind the image of an adventurous playboy, Hughes kept an eye toward the more serious business side of Hollywood. He seized an opportunity to buy RKO Pictures, then in a slump only to reduce its output drastically from around 30 films a year to 12. He promptly fired hundreds of employees, and those who remained soon realized that his vision for the studio was highly unconventional. At one point, he shut RKO down altogether due to a paranoid suspicion that it might be teeming with communists. For 6 months, he investigated the political backgrounds of every employee, apparently determined to weed out anyone who didn't match his own anti-communist stance. Not surprisingly, RKO's minority shareholders seethed over his erratic style and tried to sue him. Hughes simply bought out their shares, becoming the sole owner of the studio. Then, as if to show the world that he played by his own rules, he turned around and sold RKO 6 months later for a sizable profit. At that point, he was rolling in even more cash, fueling a spree of massive real estate purchases. 12,200 acres in Culver City, over 4,000 acres in Tucson, and 25,000 acres near Las Vegas. But life can pivot on a dime, and in 1936, Hughes's impulsive streak collided with tragedy. While driving through Los Angeles, he hit a pedestrian named Gabriel S. Meyer, who later died from his injuries. Hughes, who at first was jailed on suspicion of negligent homicide, appeared to be in real legal jeopardy, especially after a doctor examined him and noted that he seemed to have been drinking. A witness stated that Hughes had been driving erratically, and Meyer had actually been standing in a safety zone near a streetcar line. Despite that testimony, the witness abruptly changed his account, and the charges against Hughes were dropped. Many found it suspicious, suspecting that someone had used money or intimidation to secure the change of story. One of Hughes's great obsessions was flight. His father's drill bit business had turned him into a millionaire, but Howard wanted to mark his own name in aviation history. Pilots like Wiley Post had already attempted globe-circling records, so Hughes aimed to break Post's established time of 186 hours. In 1938, after meticulous planning and a custom-built plane, Hughes and his crew managed to touch down in New York, having shaved 95 hours off Post's record. It was a jaw-dropping achievement. He flew around the world faster than anyone before him, effectively halving the previous best time. This wasn't just a publicity stunt. Hughes believed that demonstrating the feasibility of safe long-distance air travel would pave the way for commercial aviation to expand on a global scale. His success catapulted his fame even higher, ensuring that the name Howard Hughes was now synonymous with daring exploits, record-breaking ambition, and a kind of rugged individualism that Americans love to celebrate. Meanwhile, his love life continued in sporadic bursts. Around the 1940s, he fell for actress Jean Peters, proposed marriage, and was politely rebuffed, likely because Peters found his eccentricities, including stationing personal security guards to follow her, overwhelming. Nonetheless, some years later, they reconnected and married in 1957. It should have been a Hollywood union reminiscent of a glamorous movie storyline, but Hughes's quirks and reclusive tendencies only grew with time. By 1958, he embarked on what one might call a binge watch of epic proportions, locking himself away in a private studio to view films nonstop for 4 consecutive months. During those months, he consumed nothing but chicken, chocolate, and milk. He didn't bathe, didn't cut his hair, and didn't even trim his fingernails. When he finally emerged, he looked disheveled and feral. Then he repeated a similar routine in a bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel, spending about $1 million in a single year on accommodations there. Servants said he wore little more than a pink napkin around his waist. As for the movies themselves, one of his favorites was Ice Station Zebra, a spy thriller with Rock Hudson. Hughes liked it so much that he made the TV station he owned play it hundreds of times, calling them at odd hours to replay scenes if he'd fallen asleep and missed something. This was no casual hobby. It was an outright obsession. Socially, these antics were odd but generally harmless, at least compared to the controversies he got embroiled in at the highest levels of power. One of the most notorious episodes concerned President Richard Nixon. Years later, it emerged that Nixon had apparently accepted a $200,000 contribution, or bribe, from Hughes, which Nixon worried could be used against him. Then, swirling rumors suggested that the Democratic Party had incriminating documents proving the shady dealings. So Nixon ordered operatives to break into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel, hoping to find and destroy anything linking him to Hughes. As history shows, the burglars were caught, Watergate blew up into a major scandal, and Nixon lost the presidency. Although the fiasco wasn't entirely about Hughes alone, it was one more messy thread in the bizarre tapestry tying him to corridors of power. By the late 1960s, Hughes was drifting from hotel to hotel, trailed by a posse of aides, girlfriends, lawyers, and bodyguards. In November 1966, he arrived in Las Vegas, checked into the Desert Inn, then decided he'd prefer not to move, so he simply bought the place. When a nearby casino sign from the Silver Slipper shone too brightly and annoyed him in his bedroom, he purchased that casino as well and had the sign moved. It was almost comically flamboyant, as if no inconvenience was too small to handle with a multi-million-dollar transaction. Alongside these extreme behaviors, his mental health deteriorated further. Odd routines solidified. Dinner every night, a medium rare steak, a salad and peas. Specifically, only small peas that matched some precise standard from his childhood. Breakfast eggs had to be cooked precisely the way his family's cook had done it decades earlier. At this point, even his marriage to Jean Peters unraveled. They hardly saw each other, communicating mostly by telephone. So in 1970, Peters filed for divorce. Rather than unleashing some sensational trial, they handled it quietly. She walked away with a modest settlement of about $70,000 a year. If gossip aficionados were hoping for a courtroom meltdown, they'd have to look elsewhere. Yet eventually, the bizarre lifestyle caught up with him. In early April 1976, Hughes boarded a Learjet in Acapulco, Mexico, allegedly for a trip to Houston. Sometime in mid-flight, he fell unconscious or stopped breathing. By the time the plane reached a hospital in Houston, staffers stared in shock at the nearly unrecognizable shell of a man. Despite being only in his early 70s, he weighed barely more than 90 pounds. His hair, nails, beard, everything had grown unchecked for who knows how long, giving him the appearance of a ragged, half-starved hermit. He was also using an alias, John T. Conover, or John T. Cooper, depending on the source, so doctors had difficulty identifying him. They resorted to fingerprint analysis for confirmation. An autopsy found kidney failure to be the proximate cause of death, but there were more unsettling details. His arms revealed fragments of hypodermic needles, as though he'd been repeatedly injected by himself or others. Some investigators suspected foul play, but the official conclusion was that he died due to self-inflicted neglect. Various substances, poor nutrition, and a slew of untreated maladies that had compounded over time. For years, no one could locate a valid will. Then out of nowhere, a handwritten document dubbed the Mormon Will appeared on a desk in Salt Lake City, Utah, at an office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Supposedly, it left chunks of Hughes's fortune to various people, including a gas station owner named Melvin Dummer. Dummer stepped forward, claiming he once found Hughes stranded by a desert highway, gave him a ride, and now Hughes was returning the kindness. Skeptics were quick to brand the entire story a fabrication. After a thorough investigation, a Nevada jury ruled the will a forgery. Dummer got nothing. With no official will recognized, the mammoth estate was divvied up among more than 20 cousins, many of whom probably hadn't spoken to Hughes in decades. In the aftermath, people still asked, what exactly pushed Hughes to such a state of paranoia and self-destruction? One theory points to neurosyphilis. Allegedly, he contracted syphilis while hopping between sexual partners in his youth, back before antibiotics were readily available. When syphilis spreads to the brain, it can cause psychosis, dementia, and a grab bag of neurological issues. Doctors might have tried mercury-based treatments, which bring their own devastating side effects. Another possibility was head trauma from multiple plane crashes, as he frequently tested experimental aircraft and survived some horrifying accidents, incurring head injuries and chronic pain. That pain led to an addiction to painkillers, which in turn contributed to his erratic behavior. Then there's the suggestion of obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, which seemed to intensify as he got older, especially under stress. Combine these factors, untreated neurosyphilis, head traumas, painkiller abuse, possible OCD, and it's not hard to see how a brilliant innovator could spiral into seclusion and mania. No matter the true cause of his unraveling, Hughes's legend endures to this day. His persona helped inspire many fictional recluses, such as the brooding millionaire Tony Stark in Marvel Comics, created by Stan Lee. Or think about the James Bond film Diamonds Are Forever, featuring an eccentric, reclusive casino owner suspiciously reminiscent of Hughes, so similar, in fact, that the producer, Albert R. Broccoli, had apparently studied the real Hughes to shape that character. It's even rumored that Hughes himself loved the film enough to keep a copy in his personal collection. Digging deeper into the phenomenon of Hughes, it's tempting to cast him as some kind of tragic hero, a modern Icarus blessed with genius but undone by his own obsessions. He soared to extraordinary heights, whether in the cockpit of experimental aircraft or in the boardroom of a major Hollywood studio. He shattered aviation records and financed some groundbreaking films, including Hell's Angels, which boasted costly aerial combat sequences. He dated some of the most celebrated actresses of his era, acquiring a reputation for being dashing, unpredictable, and fiercely independent. And then he cracked, locking himself away in dark rooms, surrounded by rotting food and tissues, fearful of germs and conspiracies, drifting in and out of sedation. Hotel employees would speak of receiving cryptic instructions to deliver certain items in certain ways, milk in boxes left outside the door, or peas meticulously sorted by size. Aides might go days without seeing him. He would shuffle from room to room or city to city, always seeking fresh accommodations that met his quirks. At times, he would snap into moments of clarity, ordering big business deals or fiddling with mechanical plans. But the mania was never far behind. Newspapers spun rumors, but the real truth was locked behind sweet doors, monitored by security guards sworn to secrecy. Only after his passing did the world see the grim extent of the toll his lifestyle had taken on his health. There's also a philanthropic angle often overshadowed by stories of his bizarre behavior. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute, established in 1953, was initially designed as a tool for tax breaks and philanthropic endeavors. Over time, it has funded groundbreaking biomedical research and made significant contributions to science. In an odd twist, the man who cowered in hotel rooms, fearful of contamination, left behind an institute that pours resources into understanding diseases. It's a complicated legacy, a reminder that Hughes could be simultaneously selfish and generous, paranoid and visionary. For those fascinated by the golden age of Hollywood, Hughes's story is entwined with the bright lights illusions of that era. He crossed paths with legends, bankrolled epic films, and bedded starlets. He also waged secret wars in the background, blacklisting employees over alleged communist ties, manipulating entire studios with a whim, and tussling with politicians behind closed doors. Snoop around the politics of mid-century America, and you'll find that Hughes was there, exerting influence through donations and quiet deals. Peek into the aviation breakthroughs of the 1930s and 1940s, and you'll find Hughes breaking records, designing unusual aircraft, and sometimes pushing the very boundaries of what was thought possible. At the end of the day, maybe the best way to remember Howard Hughes is neither as a hero nor a villain, but rather as a complicated figure whose name will forever symbolize the fine line between genius and madness. He invented, innovated, soared, and collapsed. He charmed and repelled, gave and took, planned meticulously, and acted impulsively. Over a century after his birth, we still marvel at how a single man could contain so many extremes. And if his story teaches us anything, perhaps it's that no amount of money can bring happiness or sanity if the seeds of destruction are already planted inside. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and mystery of Howard Hughes. If you've been hooked by his saga, rest assured there are countless other true stories in the annals of history and Hollywood that are just as fascinating, some uplifting, some tragic, some outlandish. many just as riddled with secrets. We hope you'll come back for more riveting adventures into the hidden corners of fame and fortune. After all, the world is full of characters who dazzle us with their brilliance and then confound us with their choices. And sometimes, those twists and turns are more dramatic than any screenplay you'll ever see. Stay tuned, keep exploring, and remember, truth can be stranger than fiction, and nowhere is that more evident than in the life of Howard Hughes.